Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Kate Schlesinger. I'm a Solutions Advisor for the Center for Professional Executive Development, and I'm excited to have you with us today as we hear from Betsy Hagan about the power of really balancing leadership and management. But before I introduce Betsy, I want to share a few words with you about the Wisconsin School of Business's Center for Professional Executive Development, or CPED, because that's much easier to say. CPED offers programs and certificates that give you the modern, relevant skills needed to advance your career. All of our programs are very interactive. They're facilitated by live instructors like today, Betsy, and offer really practical business advice. We also partner with organizations that provide customized professional development programs and coaching and consulting. We invite you to go visit our website to learn more about CPED and the programs that we offer. But before we get started, I want to go over just a few logistics today. You are only going to see Betsy and I during the time. We have over 200 people on this call today, so thank you for all joining us. This call will be recorded, so you can share this back with your colleagues and people around you if you want to watch it back, and that will be out in a few days. Also, because there are so many people, we want to have a way for you to interact with us. So if you have questions during this webinar today, you can submit those questions in two ways. One is through the chat, and I have some colleagues on as well today that are going to be helping me monitor the chat along with Betsy. And then there's also the QA button that you can ask a question. We are going to try to save most of the questions until the end, and then I will open the floor up to answer as many as we can today from Betsy. But I generally have permission to interrupt Betsy if needed. So if there's a really burning question, Betsy, I might just interrupt you.
Please do.
All right, so now with that, I would like to introduce you to Betsy. As you can see here, she has exceptional experience. She's been a practitioner for over 25 years, working specifically and primarily as a human resources executive. She's worked with some top brands, as Baxter Healthcare and Hewitt. She currently serves with us as our program director for our Foundations of Management program. She's an instructor, so a lot of times you get to meet her teaching you one-on-one. She's also a consultant for organizational effectiveness and leadership development. So you're in really good hands, and I'm really excited to tackle some of the myths behind this sort of interesting topic between management and leadership. So over to you, Betsy.
Thanks. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Kim. Thank you, Brooke, for inviting me to do a little 30 minutes with you guys. We don't have a ton of time. And in the Wheel of Fortune that was spun around what topic could Betsy talk about, I landed somehow on management versus leadership. And my first reaction was, ew, can we spin the wheel again? And can I get a different subject? But I thought, well, I did have kind of a big reaction to it. So maybe I do have some thoughts, and maybe I do have some opinions, and maybe I do want to potentially use a 30-minute time frame, if nothing else, maybe just to get us to rethink, right, these two ideas and how there's a lot of myth that goes into sort of the juxtaposition, almost this versus language creates almost like, for me, this visual of a cage match, you know what I mean? Managers versus leaders, who's going to come out alive kind of thing. And I do think that it's kind of the wrong sort of note and perspective. And I'd like to just use the time to reframe. So in many ways, I'm going to look to you guys kind of to be the jury. And this is basically my opening arguments for this case. And if you agree or you have some additional interest, maybe I can come back and actually provide more evidentiary proof of my thoughts on this. But we're going to just use the 30 minutes to talk about exactly how this kind of works and what I've thought about in terms of how, if you're in the beginning of your career, like thinking about how do I even get in the game, or you're a manager and you feel like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to get to a leadership role, or you're in a leadership role and you're like, am I doing the right things? No matter where you're at in your sort of career journey, these two ideas kind of come together, and we have to face them, and we have to look at them, and we have to decide how are we going to approach these concepts, and how are we going to think about them. So I went back. So I started this off by saying, okay, so where did this all start, this management versus leadership? And of course, there's no way to actually prove exactly where it started, but there's a lot of people who would say, look, it kind of all began with this gentleman right here, a guy by the name of Abraham Zalesnik. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He was a professor at Harvard. And he wrote this op-ed article that was called Managers and Leaders, Are They Different? Like, how much more on the nose could you be, right? So in this article that he writes, in this op-ed piece, he very clearly has an opinion that not only are managers and leaders different, but they come from completely different experiences, and they have a complete different set of sort of driving motivational behavior, and they are distinguishable by not only their actions, but sort of their belief systems. I mean, it just starts this ball rolling. So he's accredited in many ways of starting this comparison, managers versus leaders, right? But you also have guys like Pete Drucker, who was the granddaddy, right, of management theory in the 70s, also framing up this idea of, he has a famous quote that the difference between a manager and a leader is that a manager focuses on doing things right, while a leader focuses on doing the right things. And while I don't hate that quote, I start to feel the sort of sense of, okay, he's making some distinctions here. I think Drucker was talking about more from a systemic perspective, drawing some distinction, but still you're sort of interpreting, is one good and one bad, or are they both kind of coexisting? Well, for some reason, it seems like that Zalesnik and Drucker's start of this becomes sort of like opening the barn doors, right? And all the horses, every self-help, wannabe leadership guru, right, comes out of the woodwork, not only just at this time of in history, but then also into the 80s, into the 90s, into the early 10s. And I mean, everything from how to be a great leader and what leadership means, and leadership is execution, and don't be a manager, be a leader. I mean, there's all kinds of messaging, and it's basically the school of do this, don't do that, be this, don't be that, right? So the myth really begins to, I think, take a real foothold, right, in our psyche and in reality and organizational reality in the workplace, right? And so there's too many to actually put down here, and too many quotes that are frankly just depressing. So I'm going to use Warren Bennis as the poster child for that leadership development group who were out to make a lot of money. He did. He wrote a ton of books, made a gazillion dollars. He would say things like this: the manager accepts the status quo, the leader challenges it. And right then and there, you're kind of like, yeah, okay, I see the shade. I see the shade, absolutely. Now, you guys might be thinking, Betsy, why are you framing this whole thing up with three, frankly, dead guys and their perspectives? But I wanted to show you the fact that this still exists today, right? And in particular, I'm just going to use Simon Sinek, the darling of YouTube and all things wisdomy, right? Who says something like, managers watch over our numbers, our time, and our results. Leaders watch over us. Give me a break. Anyways, you get the point, right? We have this mentality of something being better than something else. Therefore, people who represent something versus another thing are better than the other thing. So this artificial distinction creates sort of this weird dynamic by which managers are sort of represented by like this guy, like a Bob Cratchit counting Scrooge's money, you know what I mean? And leaders being like Viggo Mortensen leading armies into Mordor, whatever. It's like this weird sort of management, small, leadership, big, management about process and efficiency, leadership about people, about inspiration, about visions. This dynamic becomes really pervasive, and it actually starts to shape itself into almost like conventional wisdom, right? Of course, a manager's accountability is around process. A leader's accountability is around people. And yet, if you're like me and you've been around long enough, likelihood you've worked for people who aren't very good in either one of those capacities. And so the idea that every manager is only focused on process is not true. If you've had a good manager that's been very inspirational, and if you've worked with leaders who couldn't find their way out of a paper bag, much less lead anybody else out of a paper bag, that doesn't guarantee, right, that people are going to have the qualities that are assigned to that kind of to that word or that concept. So essentially what I think, right, we start to do is to make this be like management, no, leadership, yes. So when we think about our careers, when we think about our status, when we think about who we are, when we think about where we're going, when we think about what we have to protect or keep, right? These concepts sort of can become pervasive in the way in which we think. And I actually believe that these beliefs are invasive, right? And they're invasive in ways around leadership in particular that I think are damaging. They're damaging to organizations because I think that they create this dynamic that only a certain status, only certain people who reach this pinnacle of what is meant to be leader, right, are the ones who can be visionary, are the ones that can be influential, the ones that can aspire, and the only ones that can actually care for and account for other human beings that they're working with. And I think it creates sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy for ourselves. So I want to just kind of go through what some of these beliefs are. This is the first one, and it's big, and it's kind of happening right now, right? Which is leadership is always higher and higher than management. I'm going to let that sink in for a second. A lot of times organizations, whether or not people have the title of leader or not, the official title of leader, they're referred to as the leader of something. And it's only, typically people who are at the top of the management pyramid, so to speak, the top of the organizational pyramid that are given that assignment of leader. It's a title, it's a status, it's a role, it's a responsibility, but it's typically seen as being only at the top of the organization. Leadership is innate, management is learned. It's a belief. I don't know if it's a pervasive belief, but I think it's out there. I have on more than one occasion been in interviewing scenarios where talking about candidates, somebody will say something like, I just don't think they have the leadership qualities. I just don't think they have the leadership quality. I don't think they have it. And I have to kind of pin their ears back to say, tell me what that is. What is it? What exactly is it that you're talking about? Because I don't believe that there's some innate mystical kind of thing. We're not talking about the Dalai Lama who is chosen out of whatever, a bunch of children for no rhyme or reason, that there's some people who are responsible for picking the next Dalai Lama, figure it out. That's not true. That leadership people aren't born with leadership capability, right? And management isn't just something that, is send them to a management class for. Here's one, that leaders are always charismatic and extroverted. I'm going to let the introverts on the webinar just take a moment and shake your head and go, hallelujah to that, right? This idea that somehow our outward personality and our ability to sort of, communicate in ways that you would definitely clearly define as sort of extroverted, charismatic, influential, right? All of those things are assigned sometimes in society as being certain kind of characteristics. And there's a bit of a belief system that's out there that if you don't demonstrate that, if you don't have long flowing hair like Viggo Mortensen and you're not leading people into battle to Mordor, you don't have those leadership kind of qualities. And then the last one, I think, is kind of a belief system. I think we have made some inroads in sort of blending the concepts together, but I do still think that if I had to go into most organizations and say, hey, is management and leadership the same thing? They'd be like, absolutely not, totally different things. And so what I thought, when I think about these as sort of invasive beliefs, it made me kind of go towards, well, what's the outcome of all these invasive beliefs? And here's what I think it is, right? I think that we are, through this concept of management versus leadership, we're actually promoting that sort of outdated hierarchical view of organizations, right? In which the idea that all inspiration, all things visionary come from the top of the organization and then trickle down through managers to those, everybody else who's at the bottom of the mountain. That is a really kind of old-fashioned way of thinking, actually, how organizations can and should utilize the totality of the talent that they have at their fingertips, the resources that they have. So my thought is, like, just to reframe for you guys the way, if this were, again, I was making the case, I would say, look, let's reframe this to think about it differently. Let's think about management and leadership rather than a hierarchy. Let's think about it like two distinct systems, but they're complementary systems. And they're systems of action, meaning we utilize these systems of action in order to get results, right? And each has characteristics as a function, different activities, but they actually complement one another. They're not coexisting to one another. If we get rid of the idea of these have hierarchy, then we can see them as just systems. And I put this slide in here just to give you kind of a flavor of what that would be. This, I apologize, this is not, this should be quoted towards Cotter. But I think this is a good distinction, right? That leadership produces change and movement, right? And that management produces order and consistency. Now, if you think about it that way, and you think about all different kinds of work, let's just take a project, someone who's leading a project right now, right? So in a project, you are going to need to do both. You're going to need to produce change and movement, and you're going to need to produce order and consistency. Therefore, you are going to engage the systems of leadership and engage the systems of management in order to accomplish the outcomes that you want. So yes, maybe things on the leadership shop side have to do with creating vision, big pictures, set strategy, things like that. But I think the second one is really where it comes home. Our leadership, the way we approach leadership, regardless of where we're at in an organization, is through this idea of alignment. We're constantly trying to influence the alignment of people so that they come together in ways so that we get the best out of everyone, that everyone is on the same page or in the same lane, moving towards the same direction, right? There is something about leadership that is about making sure that people are have energy and are pointing that energy towards the right thing, right? So whether we're empowering people, whether we are engaging with people, those kinds of activities, right? That's our leadership system coming into play. On the other side, we all live in real world, in real life, and we have to create order and consistency unless you are an artist who works alone and doesn't have any other need for any kind of boundaries or set time frames, set guidelines, anything that would kind of create a set of bumpers, right, of how we're going to work. And part of what the management system is that we enact, that we grab to, right, is about making sure that there's enough order and consistency in what happens so that we can track it, we can understand it, we can correct it if it's needed, we can address problems if they come up, that we have a system in order. And so if I look at these two things, right, I'm looking at one side, which is really about producing change and movement. This is about influence, right? The majority of what we're doing on the side of leadership, right, that system of leadership is about influence. And what we're doing on management, I think, is critical thinking. So I think that you have influence and critical thinking as the two cornerstones. Now, there's all kinds of other competencies that go into both sides of these systems, right? And different levels, maybe in terms of competency that's required based on the kind of role or responsibilities that you have. But if every single person who worked at a company just looked at the fact of, I have to be both a leader and a manager in all aspects of my work, and get rid of the idea that only certain people are managers and only certain people are leaders, then what happens, I think, is that people just bring forth their natural thinking, their good work, they influence effectively, they manage effectively, and you get better results. So I just wanted to show this one picture because the story was told to me and used in a different program that I was attending. And I thought it was a fascinating story. But it also is sort of the lesson in this idea of leadership and management working together. So you have a baby, Steve Jobs, pre-turtleneck on one side, and you have Steve Wozniak, who humorously still kind of looks exactly the same. But on the right side, but you may not know the guy in the middle. The guy in the middle is a gentleman by the name of Ronald Wayne. And Ron Wayne was a developer within Apple, but he was sort of a senior level person who worked with Woz quite a bit and Steve Jobs. And he helped to kind of create the documentation for the incorporation of Apple. So basically getting it started as a corporation, as an organization. And Jobs and Wozniak gave him a 10% stock in the company to do nothing other than manage the two of them because they could not work together. So you have what is arguably two of the leaders, most famous leaders of a very big and well run company, can't work together, even though they are leaders, right? And need someone to enact that system of management so that they can be effective, right? So I love that story. Go look up Ronald Wayne if you really want to know. The real story is that he then left Apple and gave up his 10% stock. And it's sort of known as the guy who left $1 gajillion on the table. Anyways, so the second idea that I have that I want to reframe for you all is that although the position of leader may be appointed and endowed with authority, anyone who has a sphere of influence can be considered a leader. So going back, I'm just going to back. If you are someone from your chair can produce change and movement because you can influence your colleagues, you influence a client, you influence whomever, you are actually enacting that system of leadership. It isn't about the hierarchy. It isn't about the title. You know, the idea here is that if we see it as activity versus destination, I think that there's a greater chance that we are going to allow ourselves to do things like challenge the status quo, to throw out big ideas, rather than waiting for the authority, for the position or the permission, right, to do so. I'll tell just a really quick story because we don't have a lot of time left, but one of my first jobs out of college was a customer service representative, and then I became the supervisor of a customer service group, and it was at Baxter Healthcare, and we sold medical products to sort of third-party markets like home healthcare and pharmacies, things like that. Anyways, occasionally we would get a call from somebody who'd be looking for a product, and we couldn't sell directly. We had to refer them back to a home healthcare in their area. And one day a gentleman called and he was trying to buy some kind of therapeutic mattress. Anyways, the customer service representative went through the thing, said, you know, we have to refer you to a local person. Let me find that place and I'll give you the phone number. And the guy went off. The guy got completely irate, started screaming and yelling at her, then hung up the phone, turned around, called back in, started screaming and yelling at the next customer service representative, basically told him the same thing, called back again, so on and so forth. Eventually, you know, all the customer service reps in cubicles started to pop up like prairie dogs, and they started talking amongst each other. They're like, okay, this is not going to work. So the next time he called in, they came and got me and said, look, Betsy, you got to take this call. You know, we're just spinning our wheels with this guy. So I am like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to take the call. So I took the call, and the guy was like, when they transferred, he was mid-sentence, just screaming and yelling and using really bad language. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. So I just thought, well, I'm just going to hang out here and, let him go. And that's what I did. And after a while, he just took a big, deep breath and did something I was not expecting at all, which is he just started sobbing on the phone, sobbing. And I was like, whoa, I was not expecting that. And I just let that go. And then when he composed himself, finally, he said, my wife has been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. I am trying to bring her home and make her comfortable so that she could die in the place that she loves with the people that she loves. And nobody will help me. And in that moment, I said, I'm going to help. I'm going to help you. We're going to take care of this. Don't worry about it. We're going to get you what you need. And I placed him on a short hold and called home health care and said, look, we're going to drop ship this mattress to this person. You're going to waive all the normal credit checking that you do. And if he doesn't pay his bill, we will pay for it. Don't worry about it. We just want you to get that thing to him. And then I got back on the phone and took care of it. Now, that was not my leadership moment, guys. My leadership moment came the next day when I walked in to my manager and the CFO of the organization. And I said, look, you are telling all of us that we are in the business of saving people's lives. Well, occasionally we come up into a situation where we really can make a difference and an impact of people who are going through something tough. So give me a few $1,000s that I have in a fund that those customer service representatives can do just what I did, right? And they can make the difference, and it doesn't have to be my authority that takes it over. And they kind of looked at it, and I think they were maybe going to push back, but they saw my determination and just said, fine, okay, we'll do that. I think they gave me $5,000 to begin with, and it ended up that I only spent $1,000. But what I did was go back to the customer service representatives, and I told them the story of what the organization was willing to do in order to put up or shut up what they meant. That was my leadership moment. That's when I was enacting movement and change. That's when I was trying to engage people, right? And so the idea of doing it, fixing it, solving the problem, that was the management system going on. I just needed to get it done, right? But leadership was taking that initiative, was going forward, was being brave, of telling my boss, these are the things that I need. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't win in our ability or attempts to influence others. But every time we do, we are actually enacting that leadership capacity that we have in ourselves. So the last thing I just want you guys to think about, and I want you to think about what's on your development plan right now, is that if these two systems come together and that they are, I think, anchored, can be disputed, but I think they're anchored in these two main capabilities, competencies, which is our ability to think critically, solve problems, organize, create order and discipline, and our ability to influence. If you are working simultaneously on tracks of those things, it's going to serve you throughout your career, regardless of where you're at, regardless of what position you have, and it's likely to take you where you want to go. Okay, that is my case, jury. You can decide. And again, I don't know whether I'll be invited back, but hey, I put my 2 cents out there.
Thank you, Betsy. Good 2 cents. We did get a couple questions that came in. So we have just a couple minutes left, but the first one, I think you sort of answered, but let's just throw it out there anyways. Can an employee be both a manager and a leader at the same time?
100%. And if you're a manager and a leader and you don't believe that, then I'm going to question, how are you engaging with the people so that they do the things that you want them to do, like influence and think critically?
Excellent. We're getting a lot of thank yous, and a lot of the jury is in your favor responses. So that is exceptional. I think we have time for one more question. Is it possible to have too many leaders in an organization?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, if you're talking about just the role, the position, the title, and when everybody is trying to distinguish themselves, sort of that issue of status becomes problematic. So you have too many people who are trying to protect their status of leader. Now, do I think that you could have too many leaders? Like the concept of leadership, can you have too much leadership in an organization? No, right? But it can get out of balance. So you could have too much leadership, not enough management. Then you have a lot of great ideas, people acting bravely, but no one has the discipline and the order to actually make it work and make those outcomes happen.
Excellent. All right. So lots of good feedback. We would always, of course, have you back. So thank you so much. But before we end, I did just want to share a little more. There's one more slide here. I think two more slides forward there, Betsy. Just a little bit about these programs. So as we mentioned, Betsy is an instructor in our management and leadership program. So you can learn directly from her and enjoy many stories like the one that she just shared with you today. So we offer so many of these. You'll see them online here. If you look to see, there's many coming up that you can join in the Fluno Center, but of course we always have custom versions of these as well. So if you're interested in bringing them back to your organization, we're happy to do that. So thank you again for attending. Thank you, Betsy. We look forward to working with you all in the future, and good luck on your leadership journeys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.